hear.
Hello, I'm Debbie Kitterman, and welcome to Dare to Hear the podcast, where we equip you and challenge you to dare to hear the voice of God. Well, I am excited because I do not often get to interview fiction authors, but today I'm going to introduce you to someone who I met back in 2019, and we're going to kind of tell that story in a minute. But her name is Lonnie Forbes, and she is the daughter of a librarian and an ex-drug smuggling surfer, which explains her passionate love of the ocean and books. I love your bio, by the way. She's a former teacher turned MFT student. Her passion is showing readers the transformative and encouraging power of the story on the human experience. A California native whose parents live in Mexico, Lani now resides in the Pacific Northwest, where she stubbornly wears flip-flops. We have that in common. No matter how cold it gets. She is a proud nerd, Gryffindor, and a member of Romance Writers of America and the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Lani, welcome to Dare to Hear the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I have been wanting to have you on the podcast since your last book came out, because you have a trilogy. And so what we're going to talk about today is the second book, but I thought we'd kind of throw them both in because people really need to read part one.
Yes,
before they
absolutely.
Get to part two. So can you hold up a picture of the covers of your books, right? And so the first one is The Seventh Son, and the one that comes out on February 16th is The Jade Bones. So hold those up first.
Yeah.
They're so beautiful.
So this is The Seventh Son. This is book one in the series.
Yes.
And then this is The Jade Bones. This is book two.
Oh, it's so good. Like my daughter is like, because she does all the graphics, and she was saying, Jade Bones, Mom, what are you talking about on the podcast? And I'm like, I finally get to introduce Lani, who I met. And so I thought we would tell our versions of the story. So I'm going to let you tell yours first, but we actually met in the shuttle coming from the airport, driving up to Mount Hermon Writers Conference in 2019. So you tell your side of the story, and then I'll tell mine.
Yeah, I was so excited because I was one of the scholarship recipients to go to Mount Hermon, or else I don't know if I would have been able to afford to go. But I was so excited to get to go because I just heard so many great things about it. And so I flew into, I don't remember what airport it was. I think was San Jose?
San Jose, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And so, they had the shuttle that was picking a bunch of us up to take us to the actual conference center. And I think we ended up getting sat next to each other.
Yeah.
And so as you do at writers conferences, you're, oh, what do you write? What do you write? And so we just started chatting, and I just was so impressed with you and your heart. Aww. And you just shared such beautiful words of wisdom with me. And I just remember being so impressed and just, I don't know, really, really taken with you. And I was so excited to follow you and check out all your stuff afterwards. So,
and I became a big fan of yours too, because as you were talking about this book that you were writing that hadn't come out yet, which was The Seventh Son. And I was like, oh, this is one of my favorite genres. Like, I don't write that, but I love to read it, and I don't often get the opportunity to do it. So I kept saying to you, okay, I need to follow you. But then the Lord began to speak to me, and it's kind of what, if people follow the podcast, it's what I call prophetic encouragement. And it was like this prophetic encouragement in action. But, a lot of people don't understand what that is. So I just was like, can I just share something with you? And I think I gave you like a word of encouragement, and we had our paths cross later. And it was so fun because you were talking, I think, about a friend of yours and what she was working on, and you were so passionate about that. And it was another book idea, which I'm so excited about. I don't know if you're pursuing that one. And I don't remember all of the words that I give unless people remind me, because it's one of those things where you just do it in the moment. But I just remember there was this connection. And when your book came out in 2019, I was like, I want to read this. And so I bought it right away. But then I was traveling. My my Bible study book had just released in 2020. And I was like, I want some time. So the pandemic served me well because I was reading The Seventh Son. That was what I did. I sat out on my deck, and it was so warm here this last summer that it's a rare thing, but I could sit on my deck and I was reading your book, and I was like, and I think I love your book. I need to have you on the podcast. And then it just didn't work out because we went into the holiday season and it was crazy. And then when I saw that the second book, Jade Bones, was coming out, I was like, I have to have you on. And I know it at the time of this recording, it hasn't come out, but you got me an advance copy and I was devouring it. And so what I love about this though is that you are a Christian, you're a believer, but you write to a secular audience. And so talk to us a little bit about like how does that work and how what's the thought process of writing for a secular audience but bringing in your beliefs?
Yeah, and that was definitely a challenge for me, was trying to decide what audience I wanted to write for. And because yeah, I am a believer, I am a Christian, and so naturally, I tend to have my Christian worldview or Christian themes that just come up naturally in the story. And so I wanted to be careful with that. I didn't want to turn off a secular audience about being too overt about things, but at the same time, there were some issues and things that I wanted to be able to talk about that I didn't think would necessarily, I don't want to say not go over as well with a Christian audience, but
Right.
I tend to like to get into things that are a little bit darker, a little bit grittier,
Mhm.
a little bit harder to deal with. And I know sometimes I don't know, sometimes the Christian fiction world is a little bit averse to some of that. And so I felt like as I wrote the book, as I felt like God kind of called me to write it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write what's in my heart, what's in my soul. And so many of the themes are so spiritual in the book. And a lot of them are kind of a lot of my own faith journey
Yeah.
and wrestling with certain things. And specifically, a huge theme in the book, if you read it, is the idea of legalism
Mhm.
and the idea of valuing following rules and laws above love and relationship. And those were definitely things that I had kind of wrestled with in the Christian church and in religious settings. And I don't know, part of it probably is if when you read my bio at the beginning, I grew up with an ex drug smuggling surfer, and just my
Right.
family's very, very involved in the recovery community. And I tend to feel a little bit more comfortable in those little bit grittier type
Yeah.
environments. Like I had joined a Bible study when I was in college, and the leader was sharing how she had been in prison and had a felony, and I was like, sweet, I feel right at home here. Okay, we're good.
I'm not going to be
So
judged. People aren't going to look at me. Yeah.
yes, I think that's probably what attracted me towards writing for a little bit more of a secular audience. But at the same time, I feel like so many of the themes that it addresses are pretty universal, and dealing with that struggle of feeling like you have to fit into a certain mold. And I think even, in the Christian community and in the Christian world, there's so many different perspectives and views, and um, different denominations and different, everybody has their like, this is the way it has to be. And if you don't follow it exactly the way we say, then you don't get to be a part of our community. And I always really wrestled with that. And so I kind of wanted to get into that a lot in my story. And I think that's applicable to, obviously, for me as a Christian, but I think it can also be widely applicable to a more secular audience as well, who can relate to some of those struggles maybe in different areas.
Absolutely. And really like looking for me when I'm reading it, I just wanted a good book to escape. That's how I like movies and fiction books. Like leave me alone and I'm happy, right? But then I have to do this whole like life thing with other people. But when I was reading even the first book, The Seventh Son, I was just like I loved it because it's based on the history of the Aztec and Mayan people. And I love that part because it's always intrigued me about who they were. And when I was in school, I always did like research projects, and I thought, oh, one of these days I'm actually going to go to the Mayan ruins or something. I've not done it yet, but I didn't you do that? Didn't you get to go somewhere when you were doing some research for?
I did actually. So I have family that my parents live in Mexico. They actually run a drug and alcohol treatment center in Mexico.
Wow.
And so I've been down to Mexico quite a bit with my family, but then also I got the opportunity to travel to Guatemala and Belize and actually get to go through some of these Mayan ruins and see a lot of, we went to Sunantunich, we went to Tikal in Guatemala. And my favorite experience was going through the ATM caves in Belize, which they think were, what the Maya believed to be the entrance to the Mayan underworld, Xibalba, which is obviously plays a very big part in book two. So
Yes, it
I
does.
actually got to go through the cave that they believed was the entrance to Xibalba. So that was pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean, when you're doing research, I'm thinking, oh, how much more alive did it make your story being able to go there? Okay, so your books talk about betrayal, murder, death, romance, apocalyptic end times, disaster, like all this stuff. Like if you are a reader and you want a good book, you need to get these. So you have to start with The Seventh Son though, because it's totally sets it up. But like the Jade Bones, which is the one that comes out on February 16th of 2021. Can you believe we're in 2021 already?
Oh,
I texted you and I'm like, when is book 3 coming out? And I was like, soon, please, soon. So I know that's the one thing about trilogies is that you get there and you're reading them and then you're like, oh, I gotta wait. But it is worth the wait for book 3. But I love this. So okay, when we were talking, I asked her, I said, okay, so how do you pronounce their names? Because as a reader, I'm like, I'm probably not pronouncing this right. And so, and then you said, oh, on my website, I actually have how you pronounce it. And I was like, Lonnie, that's brilliant. So we'll tell people how they can get on your website and get the pronunciations of these names. But the main characters are Prince Akin. Did I say it right?
Yes, Prince Akin.
Yeah, because I made her go through these with me. I'm just going to tell on myself. I made her go through these with me, and then his love interest, sort of. It is his love interest, but there's like this whole thing going on with this romance and stuff in there. Is Mayana? Did I say it right?
Yeah, Mayana.
Okay, see, that's why she's gonna do it. Okay, and then and then her really good friend who is the healer, right? She comes from the healing tribe, and say her name for me.
Yemenia.
Yeah, because I knew I was not going to say that wrong, right? And then of course, the prince has a twin sister that's a princess, and there's just like all this intrigue and this murder and this stuff. But what I did love as a prophetic individual is I'm reading this, and I was like, I can totally see here's the rules and the regulations and the way that man adds things to the religious ideologies, and the way that we say things are. But then when we go to the Word of God, we don't see that anywhere. And that plays out in book 1 and book 2. And as a prophetic individual, I always tell people, you need to read between the lines.
Yeah.
And that was it. So share a little bit about the story about what these are so that our audience can get a little bit of taste, because I want them to buy copies of both of these books.
Yeah, absolutely. So book 1, I kind of jokingly pitch it as The Bachelor meets The Hunger Games. So especially if you like The Hunger Games and those kind of YA type stories, that's very much kind of what you get in book 1. It's essentially the emperor has just died, and so his son is about to ascend to the throne. And it's in this fantasy kingdom it's not supposed to be Aztec or Mayan or but it's a fantasy kingdom kind of inspired by some of the various influences. And so it's this fantasy empire where he's about to become emperor, and in order to become emperor, he has to select a wife. And so there are 6 city-states within the empire, and each of the families from one of the royal families from one of the 6 city-states have to send a daughter to the capital, and he's going to select, so a la Bachelor style here, he has to pick which one he wants to marry. But the catch is, what makes it a little bit more dangerous than The Bachelor is the ones that he does not pick are supposed to be sacrificed to bless his marriage to the one that he does pick. So it's literally get picked by the prince or you die.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, and then I found myself relating to the 2 friends, right? To the water princess, right? And then the healer. And I was like, their stories are so, like, I could relate to them so much more. But then there's always the mean girl. There's always the one that's not the fun one, or they are using their power for evil. And just the way that you wrote those, I think people can relate to their stories.
Absolutely. Because I think if you get, I couldn't imagine being one of these girls and being sent and knowing that you're literally competing like life or death to try and impress this guy. And if he doesn't pick you, like, you're going to be sacrificed. And so just the level of tension and just desperation that would bring out of some of these characters, especially one of the princesses who comes from Ocelot, which is the city of animals, and how just you kind of bring up how her background and her culture would make her very, very competitive and very much like, I will win or else. And it's so yes, there's tension between some of the girls, but then some of the girls develop really close friendships. And the beautiful thing about book 3 especially is I actually really liked getting to bring, and it's hard because you haven't read book 3 yet, but
no, but I'm like, give me the details.
All of the princesses come back in book 3, and they really develop this beautiful relationship with all of them, even ones that supposedly were the enemies before. And so I'm really excited for all of the princesses to kind of get together and kind of realize like what we have in common and how we need to work together to literally save the world this time. So
yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. Do we have a title for book 3?
It is tentatively called The Obsidian Butterfly.
Okay, well, which I know because I read book 2, so I know why
Yes.
that is there. But that is so good, and really throughout book 1 and book 2, the spiritual message is there if you're a believer. But I was thinking about this, and I thought, what a great way to give a book that has spiritual message that you could then begin to talk to people about the book, because I know I'm going to say her name wrong, but Yaminia, no,
Yemenia.
Yemenia. See, I'm gonna do that with her. Like, I'm reading it the whole time. I'm like, oh girl, don't you understand your value? Don't you understand how important you are? But can I tell this part? Because
Yes.
she saw that her father chose her because she was the sacrifice. He wasn't choosing her to go because he knew she would win the prince's heart. He was sending her to be the sacrifice so he didn't have to send any of his other kids.
Exactly.
And how there was this hurt placed in her, this betrayal by her own father, this broken heart of somebody who actually was compassionate. I mean, she came from the healing tribes. She had an amazing gift. She was moved by compassion. I'm reading in book 2 about, how her drive to love and to heal and bring healing to somebody made her overlook what society told her she shouldn't be doing. And I was just like, I fell so much in love with her. And book 2 was like a back and forth between her and, Prince and Mayanna when they were in the underworld, but then what was happening in the real world and then the underworld. And it was this back and forth thing. I thought, Lonnie, you did a beautiful job. And I was like, I got to get through this chapter. Like, it was a page turner that I did not want to go to sleep. And there are not a lot of books that do that for me.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So yours do.
It's definitely 2 stories kind of going on at the same time in book 2. And I was surprised how much I fell in love with Yemenia's storyline. Like, I actually felt like I had more fun writing her storyline than almost Mayana and Akin's. And I love them so much. But I loved her growth arc. Like you said, how she goes from feeling so worthless because she lets everyone else define her worth and her value, that she can't see the beautiful worth and value that she has inside of herself. And I don't know. I love at the very end, and not to kind of spoiler anything, but just the way that she learns that she does have value, and how, she has value as a creation of the creator, and that in and of itself is what gives her her value. She is loved because the mother goddess created her to be the way she is and loves her the way she is. And to me, that is such a deep message that I'm like, gosh, I need to internalize that more sometimes.
Well, I know. And I was like, finding my heart. I mean, I love, of course, the main characters, right? I just fell in love with them in book 1. And so I'm like, but when you begin to develop her story and just like what motivated her, and then just this healing process where she began to really understand her worth. And I was just like, her true character, who she really was, that had been suppressed because she didn't see her value, was starting to come out at the end of the book. And I'm like, I can't. And I did text you, when is book 3 coming out? I can't wait. So yeah, I'm one of those ones that's go, please finish the editing process really fast so that it can come out next year and not in 2 years.
Well, I can assure you, book 3 is done. It is written, and I am so happy with how it turned out. Even my agent said that it is probably the best of the 3. I'm so excited. And so I'm working on it right now with my editor. She has it, and so she's supposed to be sending me notes, hopefully even as soon as next week, and we're going to get it edited, and hopefully it'll be ready to go. Where I'm guessing, because so far, like, every book has come out in February, and so I'm assuming that book 3 is going to come out in February of next year, but hopefully we'll have the advanced reader copies available this fall.
Yes, and then we'll have you back on the podcast, and then we'll talk about that, because it is a powerful message, and even I think sometimes it relates what is really happening in the natural, but it helps us get out of what we see in the natural, because we can relate to these characters in a fictional story. They're loosely based right on the Aztecs or the Mayan people, where somebody's going to pick that up that's not necessarily a believer, but it's depositing seeds of the kingdom in them, that they're going to start looking. I'm a firm believer that we all want the truth. We're all searching for the truth. We are spiritual beings, and God is calling to us, and God will use anything to bring people into the kingdom. And I really see how your books are a powerful tool that God can use to bring people into the truth of the kingdom.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, you're so welcome.
Yeah.
And so I know book 2's not out yet, but book 1 won a bunch of awards. Didn't you win a bunch of awards for book 1?
Well, I've definitely won some awards when before it was published. I had
Yeah.
entered it in some different contests through like Romance Writers of America. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping I entered it in a couple different awards that we'll see. Hopefully I'll hear back soon later this year. But
Well, I'll be praying for you and
yeah.
I'm pulling for you on that one because it, to me, I was like, yeah, this, I know why she won because the story is so well written. It's so well developed. You buy into the characters. I could see myself in the story. That's why I didn't want to put it down. And, they're long. I mean, I
Yeah.
was just like, my husband's like, are you still reading? Yes. And he goes, well, I just kind of speed read. No, I'm not speed reading this. This is not something to speed read. I love to devour books. So I'm reading all the time and I don't get the luxury of doing the fiction books all the time. So that's why I was like, I have to have Lani on the podcast. I have to have her talk about this. So, what is your hope? Like, I know I'm seeing it from my prophetic spiritual sense, but what is your hope that your books will do? Like your message, like, what do you feel that God has given you to call that out?
Yeah. And I think you especially see this a little bit more in book 3 too, is you kind of touched on a little bit that how like we as men tend to create these rules, these extra things that aren't necessarily in scripture or aren't necessarily part of, what we have to have a relationship with God. And I really wanted to emphasize that, especially in book 3, as it kind of comes out of why some of these rituals that they have been put in place and how so
Mhm.
much of it is about mankind trying to take power and control. And so for me, I don't know, I really related to that frustration and that wanting to kind of push against that almost like Pharisee type mindset of like these rules and these laws are what save us and protect us. And I'm just like, no, it's love and it's relationship and it's so much more than that. And so that to me is really the heart of the story
Yeah.
through all 3 books. And then there's other little stories kind of weaving in through, like Yemenia discovering how her self-worth is not determined by anyone else around her. And even in book 2 especially, I actually wrote book 2 during a very, very kind of trying time
Yeah.
in our family. And there was just a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of questioning. And I felt like I really was able to channel a lot of that into the story because part of Mayana's journey in book 2 is really learning to trust the creator goddess of,
Yeah.
that is there a plan? Am I just being used? Am I suffering for no reason? Like, is
Yeah.
there purpose that's going to come out of this? And do I trust? Do I not? How do I have faith in the midst of literally going through the underworld?
Yes.
and and that's very much one of the smaller stories in the overarching story, but so many of these little stories inside of it as well that just I hope can speak spiritual truth to people wherever they're at. Of if you can see yourself in some of these characters and some of these struggles that they're having, I feel like that's really my hope with the stories.
Yeah. Well, I think you did a beautiful job. That was the one thing too with Mayana that I related to so well is that, in 2019, like people are like, oh, 2020 is hard. 2019 for me was way difficult. Like, my dad passed away. He had got his diagnosis, all this stuff had happened. And I found myself questioning, like, is there a greater purpose in this? God, are you just like, am I blindly following you? Am I missing something? And so I so related to her questioning exactly what you said about questioning, like, is there a greater purpose in this? Am I being tricked in all of this? Like, am I being taken for a fool? And I found myself relating to both of these girls in book 2. And I think that's why I was like, I have to have you on to talk about this because the message here is so huge. And for me, I think especially in the context of our culture and what's happening in the world today as we're
Yeah.
here in 2021 is that there is a lot of religious stuff and God isn't about that. God is about relationship. And that was the piece that Lonnie, you brought so beautifully in was about it's a love, it's about relationship. And I've been doing some podcast episodes lately where I've been talking about the main thing is the main thing, putting Jesus at the center, right? And love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, like putting others before. And it's that
Yeah.
relationship piece. And I think that message flows so beautifully through your books that and besides they're clean too. And so, but yeah, romance and intrigue, and it's like got all the good stuff in there, murder and mayhem and apocalyptic end times and going into the underworld. I mean, it's got it all. It's got it all. And you did it so beautifully. So thank you for utilizing the gifts God has given you. And thank you for writing them. And thank you for letting me read an advance copy so that so that I can have you on the podcast, and we can talk about your book, because it is something that I think everybody needs to read. Brings it to, I think it's like, I love drama and I love the arts for a reason, because it actually takes us out of like our spirituality and it puts us into the natural, and it helps us get a message that sometimes we don't get if we're sitting in church.
Oh, and that's what I love about fiction too. And that's, I mean, even in my bio, I said that I love how story has such a transformative effect on the human experience. And
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer, Jesus taught through stories. I mean, I think stories reach us on a deep emotional level that sometimes, just sitting and listening to something or just sitting and reading something may not always kind of sink in or reach us on a deeper level. But stories just have this beautiful way of getting into our hearts and into our minds and drawing out and eliciting these emotional responses. And I think that's where story can be so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is. Your story is powerful. The story of the seventh son and Jade Bones, which releases on February 16th. So you can get book 1 and book 2 right now, and you can get them and you can start reading them, and you will be very happy that you did. And Lonnie, I just want to thank you for joining me today on the podcast episode. And actually, you're the only, like, I've only interviewed one other fiction author before. So you're the second one, but I'm going to have you back because this is awesome. And I can't wait for book 3 to come out. And I just think that the story and the message of what you've just given us a little taste of is going to be so relevant for when it comes out. I just love God's timing. Like, we think that there's timing, right? And sometimes we want to push things before they're ready. But this book too, coming out right now, was such a huge, it just fits right with what the culture is in the natural. And so it's so good because I know you wrote them before.
We as a culture are going through the underworld right now and hoping to come out the other side. So
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I was just like, I'm like, I don't know how she is with the prophetic, but this is such a prophetic book. And yet it's a secular book, but yet it has this Christian undertones of things that when we look, and I just want to just challenge everybody to just put aside your religious mindsets or your legalism, because you're like, oh, well, how can a book on, like a fiction book about the Aztec and the Mayan culture that's based on that, how can that really be? It is. It is spiritual. It is powerful. It opened me up to see even areas in my own life too, where I had been questioning something and realizing, but I have to trust the greater purpose of what God is actually doing here. And it talks about discernment too. And I'm like screaming at the characters, why can't you see the truth? Why can't you do that? And it's like all these things that we as believers need to be awakened to.
Yeah. And I mean, there's one conversation, there's like one scene in book 2 specifically where Mayana and Akin are kind of talking back and forth, and they talk about a lot of religious things. And like literally one conversation that they have is a real conversation that like I had with a good friend of mine, because I was really wrestling with this idea of like, okay, so I know the Bible tells us that God, works all things for the good of those who love him. But like, does that mean like my individual good, or is that like the greater good? Am I just this pawn that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things? As long as it achieves some greater good, does he care about my individual suffering? And that is something that I wrestled with so hard at the time when I was writing this book. And so, and the question that the person I was talking to asked me is like, well, in your heart, do you believe that God is good? And I just was like, well, yes.
Why do you have to ask that question?
And so literally that, I think Akin asks Mayana that, because she actually asks him like, okay, well, is this like the greater good, or is this for my individual good? Like, I don't understand. And he asks her like, do you believe the mother goddess is good? And I think that's what it comes down to, of just like, do you trust in the goodness of God? And just, that was so much of like, what I had to struggle with at the time I was writing the book. And so being able to put that into the story, I think
Yeah.
I don't know. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I know I
Yes,
certainly can.
I definitely could relate to that. And I think a lot of people can, because I think we ask ourselves those questions. If we're being truthful and honest to ourselves, we don't just finally go, oh, well, it just says it. I think we question those. And I think that's actually what makes our faith stronger
Yeah.
in what we believe, that we know that what we're believing is truth because we've walked it out and we wrestled those things. And I loved the way that you did that. I thought you did a beautiful job. I just want to thank you for utilizing your gifts for the kingdom, and also to deposit seeds of those that aren't in the kingdom yet, but that God he has his eye on them, and he wants to draw them in to the kingdom. So I think you did a beautiful job, Lonnie. I'm so grateful that we flew in at the same time, and that we got to be on the
Yes.
same shuttle, and that, it's one of those things where, when you're sitting with somebody and then you're like, well, I don't know how they believe, so I don't want to freak them out. So, but you were so receptive to what I shared with you. And then we talked about it, and then something happened right after that. And then you came back, and I got like, you shared with me something that happened based on what I had shared with you, which I don't always get, but I loved that. And I just loved who you were, that I have been following you since 2019, because your book didn't come out until 2020. And I am a fan, Lonnie Forbes. I am a fan of yours. And I will keep promoting your books for as long as I can, because I just think that what God has put inside of you is an amazing gift.
Thank you. That means so much.
Well, you're so welcome. Okay, so tell my viewers and my listeners how we can connect to you, because I need to go to your website and do the pronunciations, because even though we went over it at the beginning of before we even hit record, I still got it wrong, even reading my notes. So tell us how we can connect with you, your website address. I'll put those in the show notes for people. But how can we connect with you, and how can we get copies of your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is just LonnieForbes.com. It's one of the benefits of having a weird first name is that it wasn't taken. So it's just LonnieForbes.com. And then, I've got my blog on there. I've got kind of an about me. If you want to find the pronunciations and some pictures from some of my travels and research, it's under the extras tab. So there's like a little extras, and you can see a little map of the empire. You can see some of the pictures from my travels. And then, you can click on how to pronounce some of the names.
Which I need to do.
Yeah, and I try to keep my blog updated with like upcoming events or upcoming exciting things. Like The Seventh Son was actually named by Amazon one of the best YA editors pick books, and so like I put that up there that was exciting. And so I try to keep my website updated, and then links to my social media are all on my website as well. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I don't like Twitter as much. I have a Twitter, but I tend to avoid Twitter as much as I can.
Truthfully, I do too. The only thing I do with Twitter is on my blogs, I put little tweets, because people like to click the button and share something out. They feel like they come and link up and then they tweet it. And I'm like, that's the only time I'm on Twitter. I detest it.
Yes. So I definitely have all that stuff on my website. And then there's links on where to purchase the books. I always try to recommend, please purchase books through your local bookstores, just because they've been struggling so much, especially during the last year. And, just they could really use support. And so I recommend ordering through indiebound.com. Okay. And so it's a website where you can go, and it'll let you know what your local indie bookstore is. And then it'll actually ship the book right to your indie bookstore if they don't already have it. So
I love that.
Yeah.
That's really good. Cause I'm saddened. Even Christian bookstores have all closed. And so it's like, it's everything online. And I love supporting bookstores. I'm a big fan of that. So I love that. So indiebound.com, I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. And right now people can get book 1 and book 2. They can feast on those, and then they can be like me, sitting on the edge of their seat, waiting for book 3 to come out. And I'm just going to believe that it's just going to, be such a great, fast editing process that it gets to come out in February, no later than February of 2022. That's my hope. Of course, I would love it sooner, but I like that it's coming out in February. It kind of keeps people intrigued and the interest there. And so everybody, I want you to support Lani. Go follow her, go read her blog, go buy these 2 books, and then share about this message too, because I think what is here is a great message, especially for young adults or people that aren't believers, but they're really searching for the truth of who God is, that you present it in such a way that those that are hungry for the truth are going to be searching searching for more, Lonnie. So I don't know if you intended to do that, but it's definitely there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did like that you kind of pointed out too that like, so some people do need to kind of put aside their religious mindsets of like, this is allegorical. There is, magic, there is blood sacrifice, there is animal sacrifice. There's a lot of those kinds of things in it. But I actually had entered it in a Christian writing contest, and I got back this really not very nice email that was this person clutching her pearls of, how could you have any kind of, and I was like, it's an allegory. It's
Hey,
so definitely.
If they read the Bible, there's blood sacrifices and animal sacrifices in the Bible. And that was the thing, was I was like, okay, I mean, the religious and the legalistic spirits will not, they'll have issues with this, but they have issues with all kinds of things, right? But we need to break that off, because God wasn't religious and he wasn't legalistic either. That's why Jesus came and he broke those barriers. And so we need to break into the freedom of that. But God can speak through this to actually, the allegory of the message is scriptural biblical truth of, even with the blood sacrifices and really with Mayana's journey of not liking that and why, and that whole thing, I was like, I so relate to her. I so relate to her. Speaking of somebody who hates needles and blood, like I would totally have been her. But yet, when we look in the context of scripture and we look through the lens of scripture, there was required an animal sacrifice or a blood sacrifice for the atonement of sins in the scripture until Jesus came. And so, like for me, it was just spiritually scriptural laid out right there. But that's the lens I was looking through. So.
And what's interesting is so much of that is actually historical too. Like their perspectives on how blood was basically paying back this debt of that the gods gave blood for them, so they had to give blood back. To me, it was very beautifully symbiotic to the allegory story that I wanted to tell. I thought it's actually historical, but then it's also and a lot of the rituals that I add into the story that Mayana struggles with are extra that, that this empire has made it for themselves. So she's not technically criticizing the actual rituals like that would have been historical. It's made like the ancient Aztecs didn't believe you had to sacrifice the blood of the water goddess every 3 months. Like that's made up for the story. But so it's interesting that so much of the ritualistic mindset, there was a lot of crossover between the history and the story I wanted to tell. It was interesting how beautifully the two came together.
Yeah. And it really did. And that's how to me, that's how I know the Holy Spirit was totally orchestrating and you put your gifting out there on the table. And so I want to thank you for that, because it is a beautiful story for believers and non-believers. And it's going to bridge this gap for people that are looking for the truth and they're searching for the truth and they're not finding it in the world's sense of what the truth is, in the world's context of what things look like. But if you look at it through the lens of the Bible, I really believe that we can actually use this as a bridging and a gap to fill between those that aren't in the church and those that are in the church. And we could really have an open dialogue of bringing people into the kingdom because of this. And I think your book is a great tool for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Through the bridge of love. That's really the whole point of it is. Yeah. That's the point.
It is. That is the point. I like that. The bridge of love. The bridge of love. Yeah. Well, Lani, thank you for joining me today on the podcast. I really enjoyed having you on here. I enjoyed your books. Everybody go buy a copy of The Seventh Son and Jade Bones. It came out February 16th, 2021. And the other one came out in February. It was actually February 18th. I went back and looked of 2020. And so, and then we're believing for book 3 to come out.
Hopefully, yes.
February. So I'm looking at that, and then we'll have you back and we'll talk about that and we'll unpack that too, because I'm sure that the spiritual message is just as powerful. So,
I sure hope so.
Yeah. And then I'm going to go to your website and I'm going to hit the pronunciations of these things so that I can get them in my mind again. So thank you. So thank you for listening to Dare to Hear the podcast, where we encourage you to dare to hear the voice of God. Thank you for listening today. I'm Debbie Kitterman. If you've been encouraged in any way, we would love for you to subscribe to our podcast or YouTube station. Leave us a review and also a comment. That'd be great. But more importantly, if you would share today's episode about Lani and about her 2 books, The Seventh Son and The Jade Bones, so that we can get the word out there to the world on social media, your friends, your family. Buy these books, but share this message so that people can get a glimpse into really what the truth is, because we want to be bridging the gap with love. And these books bring that to the forefront. And so thank you again, Lonnie, for joining us today. And we look forward to having you on an episode of Dare to Have a Podcast next week. Until then, God bless and goodbye.
Bye.
I'm not in the thunder, I'm not in the rain, I'm not in the winds of the hurricane. Look to me, I'm drawing you near. I have called you, dare to hear. 'Cause there's peace in my presence, so do not fear. Oh, do not fear. I have called you, dare to hear. I'm not in the shaking that shatters the rocks. I'm not in the fall of the mountaintops. I'm not in the fire and consuming flame. I'm in the whisper that calls your name. 'Cause there's peace in my presence, so do not fear. Oh, do not fear. I have called you, dare to hear. He has called you, dare to hear. He has called you, dare to hear.